The storm had lasted for hours, the alien sky roaring with red lightning that tore across the clouds like cracks in glass. Ethan Cole, a Terran pilot, stumbled through the wreckage of his crashed shuttle. His suit half burned and his oxygen tank hissing softly, he had no idea where he was. Only that the planet's night was colder than death, and that the wind carried strange whispers. He looked up at the sky, but there were no stars. Only a thick blanket of black dust swirling above him. His ship's beacon was dead, his comms broken, and the emergency drone had been ripped apart by the crash. He was alone, completely and utterly alone, on a world that wanted him gone. His breath came out as mist, freezing on his visor. He pressed the side of his helmet, checking the temperature readings, and cursed under his breath. -60? Great, he muttered. The sound swallowed by the wind. He knew he needed fire. Warmth and light fast. Without it, he wouldn't last till morning. Ethan moved toward the torn remains of his ship, pulling out broken panels and wiring. The ground beneath him was soft and full of glowing moss, each step leaving a faint blue print of light. He gathered anything that could burn, anything dry or metallic enough to spark. His gloved hands trembled as he struck a flint against a piece of steel. Again and again, until finally one spark caught. It was small, fragile, but it glowed like hope itself. He leaned closer, feeding it with bits of torn fabric and moss until a tiny flame danced before him. The fire's light spread, flickering against the black trees that surrounded his crash site. For the first time since the crash, Ethan could see clearly. The forest was unlike anything he had ever seen, towering trees with violet leaves, vines that pulsed faintly as if alive, and flowers that shimmered when the wind brushed them. It was beautiful and terrifying. Every sound echoed, every shadow moved like it was breathing. He sat down beside the fire, removing his cracked helmet, feeling the faint warmth touch his skin. The smell of burning metal and alien air filled his lungs. His heart finally slowed, but only for a moment, because then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the forest wind. A low growl, distant but growing closer. He looked up sharply, scanning the tree line. The shadows between the glowing plants seemed to move differently now, like something walking on two legs, silent but heavy. Ethan grabbed the flare gun from his belt. Loading one of the last rounds, he pointed it toward the darkness, his hands shaking slightly. "Hello?" He called out, his voice cracking. No answer. Only the rustle of branches, then a second sound, lighter, faster. Circling him, whatever it wasn't alone. The hairs on his neck stood up. He slowly backed toward the fire, keeping the gun raised. The glow of the flames reflected on something ahead. Metal. No, not metal eyes. Glowing amber eyes, wide and unblinking, staring right at him from the shadows. Then another pair appeared, and another, 3 sets in total. Moving in perfect silence, Ethan's breath hitched. "Animals," he whispered, trying to convince himself. But no animal moved like that, no beast watched like that. They were calculating, studying him. A voice broke through the silence, a low, melodic whisper in a language he didn't know. It came from the left, soft but commanding. Then another voice answered it from the right. Sharp and quick, they were speaking to each other. In a rhythm that sounded almost human. Ethan froze, realizing with horror, these weren't beasts. They were people. The firelight flickered higher, and for a second, he saw them clearly, tall, graceful figures, their skin shimmering silver under the heat, their eyes burning like gold embers. They wore armor made of bone and crystal, their faces marked with glowing lines that pulsed softly with their heartbeats. And in their hands, they carried long, curved spears that reflected the firelight like mirrors. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He raised his flare gun higher, voice trembling. Stay back. I don't want trouble." One of them stepped forward slowly, tilting her head. Her voice came again. Smoother this time, but still unreadable. She gestured toward the fire, toward him. As if studying a strange animal, Ethan didn't move. The air was thick with tension, the crackle of the fire the only sound between them. Then suddenly one of the Huntresses, younger and more impatient, darted forward. Ethan reacted instinctively, pulling the trigger. The flare shot into the air with a thunderous hiss. Exploding above the trees in a burst of red light, the whole forest lit up like day, revealing dozens of glowing eyes all around. The Huntresses flinched back, shielding their faces. Ethan stumbled, backing into the fire. Heart pounding, the flare light faded slowly, leaving behind an eerie silence. When his vision cleared, the figures were gone. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. Only the soft hum of the alien wind and the crackling fire remained. Ethan stood alone once more, or so he thought, because just beyond the ring of light, hidden in the dark, 3 sets of eyes still watched him unblinking, curious and waiting, and one of them whispered softly, almost like a promise, "The fire-bearer." The night stretched on, the red flare fading slowly from the sky, leaving the forest wrapped in silver mist and flickering shadows. Ethan Cole sat close to the fire, gripping the empty flare gun in his hands. His heart still racing. He had seen them tall, fast, too coordinated to be animals, and far too silent to be friendly. Every instinct in him screamed that he was being watched. The wind brushed through the violet trees, carrying soft voices that weren't his imagination. They were whispering again. But now the voices sounded curious, almost. Careful, Ethan scanned the tree line. The fire crackling behind him, he couldn't see them. But he knew they were there, not far away, hidden among the glowing vines. 3 alien Huntresses crouched on a high ridge. Their silver skin reflected the moonlight faintly, and their golden eyes never left the human below. The leader, Karen, watched him with calm, precise focus. Her braid fell down her back, tied with bones of old prey, and a scar ran along her jaw, a mark of command. The second, Rila, younger and impatient, whispered harshly, "He burned the sacred moss, Karen. He defiles our ground." Karen did not answer, her gaze still on the man and the flickering fire. The third, Talai, softer in tone, leaned forward, her eyes full of wonder. "But he is not like the others. He is small, fragile, yet he made flame from stone." Karen finally spoke, her voice low and steady. "The flame is power, the old sign. We must know if he is danger or omen." The 3 watched as Ethan tried to rebuild the edge of his fire, gathering wreckage and pushing metal scraps closer to keep it alive. The sight fascinated them. No one had ever dared to make a fire here, not since the great burn of their ancestors. To them, fire was both curse and miracle, a forbidden gift from the sky. Ethan's breath fogged in the air, his face pale and tired. He pulled out a ration bar and chewed slowly. Trying to keep his hands steady, he spoke softly to himself. "All right, Ethan, just survive the night. Daylight means warmth. Daylight means a plan. But deep down, he knew daylight might never come easily on this planet." The Huntresses moved silently, shifting position to circle him, their steps leaving no sound on the moss. Karen raised her hand, signaling the others to stay back. She wanted to see his reaction, to test what kind of creature this human really was. She approached slowly, blending into the shadows until she stood barely 20 steps from him. The fire's orange light touched the edge of her armor, making the bone patterns glow faintly. Ethan felt it immediately. The air changed, the silence thickened, heavy and electric. He turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing, his instincts screaming again, "Who's there?" he shouted, voice breaking the quiet. Karen froze, her golden eyes reflecting the firelight like a predator, caught between curiosity and caution. He couldn't see her clearly, but her outline moved, a shimmer among the trees. Ethan raised the flare gun again, though he knew he had only one shot left. "Don't move," he said, his voice trembling. "I mean it," but Karen didn't understand his words. Only his tone, the warning in his stance. She took another step forward, lowering her spear to show she wasn't attacking. Rila, hidden above, whispered angrily, "He threatens you." "Let me strike." Karen lifted her hand slightly. Silencing her, the human's face was visible, now pale skin. Brown eyes wide with fear, but not hatred. He looked lost, not like an invader. Talai murmured, "Karen, look, he shakes from cold." "Not battle." Karen's expression softened. Her mind torn between duty and something she couldn't name. The human's fire had drawn her, yes. But something else kept her there, his defiance in the face of fear. When he aimed that strange weapon at her, she saw not rage, but desperation. And she wondered if this was the omen the elders spoke of. The arrival of the fire-bearer from the stars. Ethan backed away slowly, keeping the weapon steady. Then crack. A sudden sound behind him. He spun fast, finger twitching on the trigger. It was Rila, who had moved too close, her foot snapping a dry branch. The sound broke the tense silence like thunder. Ethan's reflexes kicked in. He fired, the flare streaking up into the canopy with a sharp hiss. It exploded above them in a flash of blinding red light. The shockwave sent glowing leaves fluttering down like embers. Lighting up the forest in blood-red color, the huntresses ducked instinctively, covering their faces from the flare's heat. Karen shouted a command in her native tongue, pulling Rila down. Ethan stumbled back, falling to one knee, breathing hard, his heart pounding like a drum. When the light faded, the forest was glowing faintly red from the scattered moss fires. Karen looked at the small fire spreading near a tree and cursed softly. "The flame eats the ground again," she muttered. Rila hissed, "We should end him now before the forest burns." But Karen hesitated, her gaze fixed on the human, who now rushed to stomp out the spreading flames. He wasn't running or fighting. He was protecting their forest. "Even without knowing it," Talai whispered, her tone trembling. "Karen." "He stops the burn." And Karen, for the first time that night, lowered her spear completely. "Not yet," she said quietly. "We will watch him till dawn." The three huntresses melted back into the shadows, their golden eyes fading one by one. Ethan stood alone once more, the smoke curling into the cold sky. He had no idea that his small fire had already changed something ancient. Somewhere deep in the forest, a silent horn echoed. The tribe had been alerted the huntresses had found a fire-bearer. The night faded slowly into a gray morning, the mist rolling across the alien forest like waves of smoke. Ethan Cole woke to the sound of soft rustling nearby, his body aching from the cold ground. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and his breath came out in small white clouds. He rubbed his eyes and looked around, feeling that same uneasy weight pressing against his back, the feeling of being watched. The forest was quiet, too quiet, no birds, no insects, only silence and the faint hum of energy that seemed to live in the air itself. Ethan reached for his flare gun. Checking the single round he had left, he sighed. "All right, buddy." "No more panic shots today," he muttered, trying to sound calm, but his voice trembled. He could still see faint tracks near the moss-light footprints, narrow, too symmetrical to be animals. Whoever they were, they had been close, watching him all night. He stood up, scanning the wreckage of his shuttle again, hoping to find anything useful. The hull was cracked open like an eggshell, but the emergency beacon inside might still work. He crouched, pulling out panels, when a sudden whisper froze him in place. It wasn't his imagination someone was behind him. "Stay back," Ethan said quietly. Gripping his flare gun tighter, he turned slowly, his heart pounding hard against his ribs. Standing at the edge of the mist was Karen, the tall, silver-skinned huntress from the night before. Her armor glimmered faintly, and the markings on her skin pulsed like living light. She stood still, spear lowered. Her golden eyes locked on him. Ethan didn't know what to do. She didn't look angry, just curious. Cautious, he raised his hands slowly, showing he wasn't holding a weapon. "Look, I don't want to fight, okay?" he said softly. "I'm just trying to survive here." Karen tilted her head, trying to read his tone, her eyes narrowing slightly. From behind her, Rila and Talai appeared. Moving silently through the trees, they flanked her sides. Weapons ready, but not raised, Ethan took a step back, his boots crunching softly on the glowing moss. Rila whispered something sharp in her language. Her eyes cold, Karen responded with a short command, and Rila hesitated, lowering her spear just slightly. Ethan slowly crouched and picked up a broken ration pack. Holding it up, he tore it open and showed the contents. A small cube of compressed food. He pointed to it, then to his mouth. Hoping they'd understand, Talai's eyes widened slightly, and she murmured to Karen. Karen nodded slowly, understanding at least his intention. For a moment, the tension softened, but then everything went wrong. A sudden burst of static erupted from the wreckage behind Ethan. The old beacon he'd been working on sparked and caught fire. Sending a pillar of smoke into the air, the sound startled Rila, who thought it was an attack. She lunged forward. Her spear flashing, Ethan spun, panic flooding his mind, and fired the flare gun instinctively. The flare exploded between them in a blinding burst of red light and smoke. The shockwave knocked them all backward, ash and burning moss swirling through the air. Karen shouted something in her native tongue. Her voice echoing through the forest, Rila hissed in pain, her armor scorched by the flare's light. Talai helped her up, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Ethan stumbled back, coughing, trying to wave away the smoke. "I said I didn't want trouble," he shouted, voice breaking. The forest was on fire again, small flames crawling across the glowing moss. Ethan grabbed a metal plate and began hitting the flames. Trying to put them out, the Huntresses froze, watching him. He wasn't attacking, he was protecting the ground, the same sacred moss they guarded. Karen's eyes softened as she realized what he was doing. "Stop," she commanded to her warriors. Her tone firm but calm. Rila protested. "He burns again." Karen pointed to Ethan. "No, he fights the burn." The words silenced them both. Ethan continued to beat down the fire until the last flame died out. His suit was covered in ash, his face streaked with sweat and dirt. He dropped the metal plate and fell to his knees. Breathing heavily, when he looked up, Karen was standing right in front of him. Her spear lowered completely. For a moment, neither of them moved. The alien forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Karen slowly reached out her hand. Palm open, Ethan hesitated, then took it. Her skin cool and smooth against his glove. It wasn't a handshake of peace, exactly, but it was a start. Talai smiled faintly, whispering, "The fire-bearer does not destroy. He protects." Rila looked away, unsure. Still tense but less hostile, Karen studied Ethan closely, noting the small wounds on his arm, the exhaustion in his eyes. Without a word, she removed a vial from her belt, a glowing blue liquid, and poured it gently over his cut. It burned for a second, then cooled instantly. The wound sealing like magic, Ethan blinked, stunned. "What? What was that?" he whispered. Karen didn't answer. just nodded once, as if to say, "You're safe for now, then." Distant drums echoed from deeper in the forest, a deep, rhythmic sound that made Karen's expression change from calm to concern. Talai whispered, "The chieftain knows." Karen looked back toward the trees. Then at Ethan, she said something softly, her tone heavy with warning. Though Ethan couldn't understand the words, he caught one sound clearly. She said his name. And then, for the first time, the drums grew louder. Karen turned and gestured for her sisters to move. Before disappearing into the forest, she gave him one last glance. Her golden eyes seemed to say, "Hide the fire." Ethan stood in silence as the mist swallowed them again. He didn't know who the chieftain was, or why they feared him. But he knew one thing: the fire had drawn attention, and now the whole planet knew he existed. The misunderstanding was over, but the real danger had just begun. The smoke from the small fires hung low in the morning air, twisting like gray ribbons through the glowing forest. Ethan sat near the ashes of his old campfire, exhausted and confused. He kept replaying the moment in his head. Karen had spoken his name, had healed his wound, and then left with that strange warning. Now the forest was quiet again, but not peaceful. It was the silence before something happened. He stood and looked around the wreck of his shuttle. He needed a new plan if he couldn't fix the beacon. He had to survive long enough to make contact with anyone who could find him. He took a broken panel and started shaping it into a mirror for signaling. But every now and then, he caught himself glancing toward the trees, half expecting those golden eyes to appear again. By midday, the forest air grew thicker, heavy with heat. Ethan decided to light another small fire to boil water from a stream nearby. He gathered the glowing moss again, this time carefully, trying to keep the flames small and controlled. He remembered Karen's last look, "Hide the fire," but he also knew he couldn't survive without it. When the fire sparked to life, its reflection shimmered in the water, and for a brief moment, he saw something move behind him. He turned slowly. Karen was standing there again, this time without her spear raised. Rila and Talai stood a few steps behind her, their posture guarded but not hostile. Ethan let out a shaky breath. "You came back," he said softly. Karen tilted her head, repeating slowly, "You came back." Her voice was low, her accent rough but understandable. Ethan froze, surprised, and nodded quickly. "Yes. Yes, I'm here." She looked at his fire, her eyes narrowing. Then she pointed to it, then to the sky. Ethan didn't understand. She repeated the gesture, adding the word "smoke." He finally got it. "Hide the smoke," he whispered, nodding. She nodded back, a faint glimmer of understanding passing between them. Ethan quickly covered the small fire with a piece of metal. Leaving only a thin hole for air, Karen stepped closer, studying how he managed the flames. Her expression softened again, and for the first time, Ethan saw curiosity instead of caution in her eyes. He pointed to himself. "Ethan?" She hesitated, then said, "Karen," tapping her chest lightly. He smiled faintly, repeating, "Karen." Rila frowned, whispering something sharp to her leader, but Karen raised her hand. Silencing her again, Talai smiled softly, clearly amused by the exchange. As the afternoon passed, the tension between them eased. Ethan showed them his survival gear, his water filter, emergency blanket, and ration bars. The Huntresses examined everything with fascination. Talai pointed at the metallic blanket and gasped softly when it reflected her face. Rila remained cautious, circling him slowly, but she no longer aimed her weapon. Karen watched quietly, trying to understand this strange man who made light without power and warmth without fear. When Ethan offered them food, they hesitated. He broke the ration bar into pieces and ate one himself first. Showing it was safe, Karen took one, sniffed it, then bit off a corner. Her eyes widening at the taste, Tylai giggled softly, taking her piece and nodding in approval. For a brief moment, laughter echoed through the forest range. Foreign, but real. Then the wind shifted, carrying a deep horn sound again from far away. The smiles faded instantly. Karen's expression turned serious. She turned toward the direction of the sound, her muscles tensing. Rila whispered something, her tone urgent. Ethan didn't understand, but he could feel the fear in their movements. Karen turned back to him and pointed toward the higher cliffs beyond the forest. "Go," she said, her voice firm. Ethan frowned. "Go?" "Why?" She pointed again, harder this time. "Go." "Hide." Then she looked at the sky, and Ethan realized the horn was not the only thing coming. The air shimmered faintly above the trees, like a heat wave, but it was more mechanical ships. He saw the faint outlines of alien crafts moving slowly through the clouds, searching, scanning. "Your tribe?" Ethan asked. Karen's face darkened. "Not tribe. Dominion." The word hung heavy in the air. He didn't know who the Dominion were, but he understood enough. They were not friendly. Karen gestured quickly, and Tylai handed Ethan a piece of cloth from her belt. It was painted with white dust and faint red lines, a symbol of her tribe. Karen tied it around his arm, saying, "Mark." "Safe." Ethan looked at it, realizing it was a warning sign to other huntresses not to harm him. She turned to go, but Ethan stopped her with a soft, "Wait." He pointed to the small piece of metal she had given him before. A charm shaped like a flame. He placed it in her hand, closing her fingers around it. "For trust," he said quietly. Karen stared at him for a moment, then nodded once. Her eyes held a strange warmth, something she didn't quite understand yet. Then she and her sisters disappeared into the forest. Silent as ghosts, the sky rumbled again, louder now. Ethan crouched low behind the wreck, clutching his rifle and looking at the horizon. The Dominion ships descended slowly, scanning beams cutting across the forest. He thought about Karen's warning, about the strange mark on his arm. He didn't know who to trust, but somehow he trusted her. As the searchlights swept closer, the smoke from his small fire finally rose high enough to catch one. Ethan cursed under his breath, covering it fast. Too late. The beam froze on his position, and deep in the forest, Karen stopped running. Her golden eyes flashing with alarm, she whispered to herself, "Firebearer," before vanishing into the shadows once more. The air was thick with smoke and fear. Ethan crouched behind the wreck of his shuttle, heart pounding as beams of blue light swept across the forest. The Dominion ships moved in slow circles, scanning the ground for life, their engines humming like angry insects. He could feel the vibration through the dirt, each pulse of sound shaking his chest. He remembered Karen's words, "Go." "Hide," and the warning in her eyes. The mark on his arm glowed faintly, a strange dust that shimmered under the searchlights. Maybe it would protect him, maybe not, but it was all he had. He pulled a broken wing panel over himself, holding his breath as the lights passed close. The forest seemed to hold its own breath too. No animal moved, no wind stirred. Only the hum of the ships above. Then, suddenly, a mechanical voice boomed through the air, speaking in a harsh, guttural alien tone. Ethan didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. They were hunting. From far away, a second sound echoed the call of a horn. Deep and powerful, it was not the Dominion this time. It was the Huntresses. Karen had returned, and she was not alone. Hundreds of glowing eyes appeared between the trees. Silent and united, Ethan peeked through a crack in the metal panel. He saw them Karen at the front, her silver armor shining like moonlight, her spear glowing with blue energy. Rila and Talai stood beside her. each carrying longbows of carved bone and crystal. They moved like a storm through the forest. Silent but full of purpose, Karen raised her hand. Signaling to her warriors, she looked up at the Dominion ships and whispered a single word that carried across the trees. Burn. In an instant, dozens of arrows ignited with fire and light. They flew through the air like falling stars, striking the ship's underbellies and bursting into flame. Ethan's eyes widened. "They're attacking," he whispered, half in awe. The Dominion ships roared as explosions rocked the air, sending debris raining down. He could hear the alien pilots shouting, their beams cutting wildly through the smoke. Karen moved like lightning, spinning her spear and striking down a falling drone that crashed near Ethan's wreck. He crawled out from his hiding spot, coughing from the smoke. Karen saw him and shouted something, pointing toward the ridge. He didn't know what she said, but her gesture was clear move. He ran toward her, ducking as burning fragments fell from the sky. When he reached her, 2 Dominion soldiers dropped from a damaged transport. Their armor black and sharp-edged, they aimed plasma rifles at Karen, shouting in a language Ethan didn't know. Without thinking, Ethan raised his weapon, firing a burst of bullets that hit one square in the chest. The other turned, firing back. The blast knocking Ethan to the ground, Karen leapt between them, her spear slicing through the air in a bright blue arc. The soldier fell, sparks flying from his armor. For a second, silence returned, only the crackle of fires filling the air. Karen turned to Ethan, her expression unreadable. He groaned. Clutching his shoulder where the plasma blast had grazed him, she knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her own cloak and pressing it to his wound. Her voice was calm, steady. "You fight with us," she said slowly. Her accent thick but clear. Ethan managed a weak smile. "I guess so." The battle raged for another hour. The Huntresses fought with speed and unity, striking from the trees and vanishing before the Dominion could aim. When the last ship exploded in the sky, the forest fell silent once more. Smoke rose high above the canopy. Glowing orange under the fading sun, Karen stood among the ruins, her armor scorched, but her stance proud. She turned to Ethan, her golden eyes soft now, no longer seeing an intruder, but something else an equal. Talai approached, whispering something with a smile, and even Rila nodded with respect. Karen looked at him and said, "Firebearer." "Friend," Ethan chuckled weakly. "Yeah, friend." The other Huntresses gathered around, bowing their heads slightly to Karen and to him. They began chanting softly, a rhythm like wind through flames. It was a song, old and sacred, about the fire that brings both destruction and rebirth. Ethan didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. As the sun sank behind the alien mountains, Karen placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. "The spark that changes the hunt," she said, her tone filled with pride and awe. He looked around at the glowing forest, the smoke rising peacefully now. He realized the truth. The fire he lit for survival had started something far greater. That single flame had united 2 worlds, the human who fell from the sky, and the Huntresses who once saw fire as forbiddance, now stood together as allies under the same stars. Karen raised her spear high, shouting to her tribe, "The fire lives." The warriors echoed her cry, their voices thundering through the forest. Ethan smiled, feeling warmth spread through him, not just from the flames, but from something deeper, hope. For the first time since the crash, he didn't feel lost. He looked at Karen, her silver armor gleaming under the light, and whispered softly, "Thank you." She nodded once, her lips curving slightly in what might have been the first smile he had ever seen her make. As the camera pulled back, the forest stretched endlessly below, glowing blue and gold in the night. A small fire still burned where it all began. A spark in the dark that changed the fate of a world forever.